Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. This is Restaurant Table Booking App video series part 6. Building restaurant controllers and retrieving the data endpoints for our first UI page. Okay, come let's dive in. So in this video, I'm going to focus on these 4 endpoints. We are going to build all these 4 endpoints. So let's take a look. The first one is get all the restaurants. Right now we have just one data, so I'm bringing up one result. But if we add more data, it's going to come with more restaurants. Now if you provide a particular restaurant ID, the second endpoint is going to retrieve all the branches associated with that particular restaurant ID. Right, so the restaurant ID is mandate here, and if I pass 1, all the 5 restaurant branches that we have already in the database, right, we are going to retrieve that. See, that's why I was setting up the sample data. Okay, it will be easy for us to figure out where endpoints are working. Third one is you provide a particular branch ID and get all the dining tables that are linked to a branch, right? Like I said, branch might have 1, 2, 100, 20 tables, we don't know. So based on that, it's going to retrieve all the branch IDs with their details, like the table name, what's the capacity of the table, all those things, right, for a particular branch. So that will be our third get endpoint. And then once you have these 3 things, what you can do is, and then what I'm going to do in the next endpoint is you pass a particular branch ID and you also pass a particular date and find out what tables are assigned or allocated for those for a particular branch for a particular date. That is what it is, right? If you specify a date to which the branch has not been assigned with some tables, like I'm running a shop, I'm telling, okay, tomorrow I'm on leave, so I will not publish any of my dining tables in time slots. So that is why this fourth endpoint is. Okay, so we are going to build these things one by one. Let's go and open up the project, and the first thing that we have to do is just create a view model folder under the core project. Any models that come inside this will be shared across different projects, and not only that, this model is what we will use it for the endpoint migration. We will never expose our real entity directly to the users or in the endpoints. That's why. Now let's open up the data folder. What I'm going to do is I'm going to build a repository. Data layer is all about repository. Remember that we will always talk to database only from the data layer. Okay, so that's why this is called repository. We will build a repository called restaurant repository, and we will first add a model. See here, what we are going to do is we will be creating a method which will talk to database and get the data, translate the data into a response of the endpoint. So let's add a class. I'm going to add a bunch of models in the same class, but when you do, you can either do this or in a production ready environment. Generally each class should be in each file. Okay, now the class has to be a public class, so public class, and then we will name it as restaurant model. So once you have that, you can bring in the namespace here, and the restaurant model will have its ID, name, address, phone number, email, and the other one. Okay, now the term async stands here because we are saying this method is asynchronous method. Okay, we will never build a synchronous method. Async is very good and it's easy to implement. So I restaurant repository, right? So that's why all the async method will end with async, and then it will always return a task of a particular type. Here in our case, task of IEnumerable restaurant model. Now let's create a class called restaurant repository which will implement restaurant repository. Okay, control period. If you do, it will give you a suggestion to implement what are the interfaces are present. Okay, if you're very new to the C#, if you want to know interface and inheritance and all those things, we will make a different video, but let's assume you know all these things. So we're going to create a constructor CTOR. If you type CTOR and do a tab, a constructor will come. Okay, the constructor of the class that you are working will come. Here we will need to inject a DB context class. Restaurant table booking DB context is the name of the context that we built in the second or third video, if you remember, right? So that we are going to bring in, we are going to inject that class. Okay, it doesn't have any interface, obviously it won't have. So this is called DB context. I will name it as _DB context. Okay, so now this repository will have this context class, right? So now we will implement this. See, in order to get the table's information, we will use this db context dot. When you put dot, all the 6 tables that is defined in the db context as db set will come here. In our case, what we need, we just need to return restaurant details, so it's straightforward. Okay, db context dot restaurant and then dot select. Dot select is the link queue method. Okay, we'll talk about more about the link queues in a separate video if you're not aware of this, but dot select is an extension method of this type and it's a link queue method. We're going to use lambda expression. We will say r goes for, and my return type is new restaurant model, so I'll say new restaurant model, and then I'll start filling up the properties of the restaurant model. In our case, restaurant model have these property. They are mapped with their respective IDs and names from the table that we are selecting. Finally, if you do a .toList, this data will become a synchronous method. What is synchronous method? It has to execute and wait for the result until and let that time happens. The call will not suspend, and all the others people have to wait. I have a separate async and await video. I'll give you in the description. Please go ahead and take a look at how the sync and async works. But now let's convert this to .toList async. All of the method will have their respective async and synchronous method. We will almost use only asynchronous in my teaching. That's easy and very best for you guys to learn. So we will use this. Like the moment you say .toList async, okay, this will return a task of list. It is not executed yet. Remember this piece of line from 21 to 30. It will execute, but it will not be queried in the database. It will be an in-memory query. Okay. In order to get the result, what we have to do is we need to await. We have to put a keyword called await. The moment you put a keyword called await, async is the keyword that is expected before the word called task. Once you do this, the restaurant variable will have the data available, and then you return this data. Okay, now this is because it is enumerable. That's why it has to have a data. We will shortly see how this works with a different list. So like I said, you can have a lot of methods, synchronous and asynchronous. Find is a synchronous, find async is a asynchronous method. Both does the same thing. Similarly, all these things that you see here, they are called extension methods. Extension methods are coming from the existing Microsoft LinkUDLL for these types. Okay, so you can use a lot. We will be using it as and when we build. But let's say we are going to use an extension method called order by. This is the equivalent of a SQL query called order by. When you say order by, you're saying order the result by its name. Order by descending, there's a method called order by descending. Then it will do a descending order. Okay, it's very easy. Now what we are going to do is now we built one repository method inside a repository class. We need to have its equivalent or a calling method from the servers, because from API it calls to a service. Service will then call the database layer. Database layer will return to the service. Service will return to the API controller. That's the flow. That's the layered architecture, right? Generally speaking, in the service only we do a lot of business logic, but our apps are not that complicated. We sometimes don't see business logic coming here, but that's just for your understanding, right? Here what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a restaurant service and implement into restaurant service class. Okay, so here when you do a CTOR, this is a constructor. Here remember you need to call the data layer, right? So here you will be injecting restaurant repository. Okay, only the restaurant repository was injecting the DB context. We don't inject the DB context anywhere else. Remember this. Okay, we will always talk to database only in the data layer. Okay, so here it's easy. Once you have this method here, you can directly use the service, the repository object, and then call the method get all restaurant async. See, here we don't use async await. Okay, here we don't use async await because this is returning just a task. If you want a result at a particular position, particular point of time, you need to have a await keyword. But if you don't need to use You don't need it. Let's convert this to a different way. So now I go back to the same method. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, instead of returning the result itself, I will return directly the restaurants. Okay, I'm removing the async await here. Okay, because it has to be a list. Okay, so what I'm going to change my structure is public task list of restaurant method. IEnumerable, I removed it and make it as list. Similarly, go to the interface and change it. So now understand this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to query, and this query will be executed when someone says await. Okay, that's the idea. When this method is invoked, this query is executed, but not in the database level. It is executed in the memory, it holds it what executes, and it returns a task of list of restaurant model. It is guaranteeing to return a model when the data is available. Until that time, it won't execute the query. That's called deferred execution. In an interview, if you are asked all these kind of questions, or even for your understanding purpose, this is called deferred execution. Okay, here also we don't need data, which means I don't want to use async await. Okay, so I'm changing this also to a list. This is just for your understanding. I'm teaching it how it is being translated. Now we have a service, we have the repository. The next thing is use the service in the new controller called restaurant controller. Let's clean up the weather forecast controller in the method. We don't need it anymore. Right click on the controllers, click on add and select web API controller. Okay, right click on API, select empty API controller. That's a web API controller. Okay, now once you give a name, if you closely monitor, this controller class is inherited by something called controller base. Controller base will give us all the information about returning a different HTTP status code and handling all those stuff, right? And then if you look at the route will be our domain name slash API slash controller name. Controller name is automatically picked up, which is restaurant. Okay, and we will also decorate this class as an API controller. Okay, then only our Swagger will understand that this is a controller and endpoints, and you will see now in couple of minutes. See, CTOR, we created a constructor, and remember from here we will invoke the service. We don't invoke database layer directly. Okay, so we invoke the service and we're going to create the first endpoint, our first get restaurant endpoint. Okay, so far the setup is done. We're setting up the private field for this iRestaurant service. Now those are new for this endpoint. Okay, endpoint means it's a accessible URL. So we will start with public, and it's a return type is called action result. Why action result? Why can't be something else? Action result is a general high level term. Under action result, file, all different types of results can be returned. View result, OK result, a lot, right? That's why we use it as action result followed by given name. And remember, this method has to be a public method. If it is not a public method, this is one of the interview question. If it is not public method, this endpoint will not be exposed outside. The code will be there sitting all the way through, no one calls it. Now we use this restaurant service dot get all restaurant async. Here we definitely need data. Okay, this is the point where we need data to return to the user. In the service, in the DB thing, we don't need it. In case we have a business logic in the service, probably we need it, which also we will see shortly when we implement different endpoints. So now let's convert this to a asynchronous method. Okay, like I said, I'll give you a separate video link. I have explained about the async and synchronous method, how good it is. Go and take a look. So let's use async and await keyword. So await is keywords to get the data, wait for the data. So we will use the async in the signature, where public async followed by the task of iResult, action result, and then in the await statement you are awaiting any asynchronous method. Okay, in our case it is get all restaurant async is an asynchronous method. That's why we're using await here. Okay, now this will return the restaurant data. Now after you receive the data, you simply return OK, and then inside this model, OK will return an HTTP status code of 200. That's why they call it as 200 OK status code. Okay, this is the default status code that is returned during the get endpoint. There are other various HTTP status code that are possible to be returned, which we will see, but this will be the successful return response code. Okay, now after this we need to decorate this method with a HTTP verb. HTTP verbs are 5: get, put, patch, post, delete. We will use the get endpoint, so this is decorated by HTTP get, and you can name within the get method that will become a name of the endpoint. Okay, if you don't do it here, it will be a direct get endpoint, but let's understand this. And then the next thing is, because we're using the Swagger package, we can use something called produce response type. Basically, we're decorating all this metadata information. This, when we run it in the Swagger, documentation will tell us, okay, this endpoint, when you invoke, the possible return status code is 200 and what kind of results that you can return. So it will even tell the user before even invoking the API that they will get a list of restaurant model. Okay, that is why this decoration is important, and the more better you decorate, the more documented information is shown on the Swagger endpoint, and that's when clients, whoever consumes this API, will be able to know. Now before we run this application, there is one more thing called dependency injection. Dependency injection is one of the core thing in the .NET Core, right? It's very inbuilt. It's superb concept. So in order to do that, there's something called, if you go to the program and use builder.service, there are three things: add scoped, add transient, and add singleton. Let's see one by one. Add scoped. Add scoped is the best and default the level that we will use. Here you will specify what is the interface and what is the implementation class. What is add scoped? Add scope means whenever you inject a service like this, like whenever you ask for a instance, for a given HTTP request, one instance will be given. Let's say I restaurant repository is invoked in a couple of places. Let's say controller, in services. Throughout this one call, for a given call, only one time the instance is generated and the same instance is reused. Okay, add transient is every single time that you ask for an instance, a new instance will be given. Okay, so let's say you have a couple of services, you are injecting that in the constructor, which means every single place where you inject, a new instance of this class will be given. The last one is, in my opinion, it's a dangerous one, called add singleton. Add singleton means throughout the application, once the application starts, it generates an instance and keep it ready. Okay, it's not thread safe. There are instances where you need to use the singleton, but our most of the cases we will go with add scoped. That's the perfect one that you need to choose. Okay, add transient also will be used, but maybe not in my demo. If I come across, I'll definitely show, but let's clean up this one for the understanding. So we will be configuring the DI here. One is the iRestaurant repository, one is the iRestaurant service, because we have two different interfaces implemented and being used in the code, right? So we have to configure that service. Okay, that's important. So once you do that, we should be good to go. Now let's save this. So click on run and it's going to build the project and it's going to run, and we will see the first endpoint that we built. Okay, and I'm eager to see. Okay, it's running. All right, see, we deleted the weather forecast, so it disappeared, and then restaurant app came. When you execute, it's going to hit the breakpoint. I believe I have set the breakpoint. So let's go to the controller and let's set the breakpoint before I hit it. Okay, so when I hit, it should come there. It came. right? So all are correct. It's going inside the service, it's executing this. See, when this runs, I'll show you what happens. Like I said, we are not using async await, right? So this method is kind of a suspended. It's not run yet. It says, right, not yet completed. It's because it's giving a promise to the caller that I will give you this result, but for now it's a task of result. It's not executed yet. The moment it sees await, the call will be executed and you can see the results coming up here, and this is the result which will be sending to the user, meaning the caller, right? So in our case it is a Swagger endpoint, and Swagger endpoint should give us the response here. You see this? Alright, so we got the response. Only one record is there, so it's coming, but as and when we add more records, you'll be able to see more records. Alright, now it's time to build the rest of the 3 endpoints. For that, again, we'll start from the end of the database, right? So first let's go to this model and create the model that I wanted to use it in the 3 endpoints. The second endpoint is all about getting the restaurant branches. So the restaurant branch model, and then third one is a custom model. If you look at this carefully, I have a branch ID, the reservation date, the table name, its capacity, its mail type, table status, and the time slot ID. So basically we're going to build something which will use the return type of these three, I would say these two, and the model that I just built it. So 3 interface methods I just copy pasted. The first one is to pass the restaurant ID, get all the restaurant branches. Okay, so that is what this is called, and in this case I'm going to use the enumerable. We will use the async await in the database layer itself, just to show you different flavors of how you can use it, and how it works. The second one is you pass the branch ID and the date. We will retrieve those particular information, right? In this case, date is considered as the future date, and then if you don't pass the date for the third one, basically what it will do is it will always get all the branches and its tables, or a given branch and its table, on the future date, because you cannot book a restaurant table for the past date, right? You cannot do that. That's why. Now if you come here and do a control period, it will ask you to implement the basic the design. So that's why line number 42 to 55 has come. Now inside each method we need to implement the logic, so that eventually this can be used in the service, and then we can integrate this into the controller as well. I'm going to copy paste a piece of code. I'm converting this into an asynchronous method because I'm using an enumerable. That's why you need to use a async await here. It's just a flavors. You just need to understand how it works. Okay, it's a learning curve. You can use the first type of thing also, change it to list if you want to try it. But here's the thing, I think there was a branches mistake, so I just corrected it. Alright, so here the only difference is we were putting in var class and filtering the restaurants based on the restaurant ID. Here we will use the restaurant branch table. Okay, the rest of the code looks almost similar to what we did in the first method, right? Now this is the interesting one. I'm going to use 2 different methods. One is the link your lambda expression and non-lambda expression, regular query. The first one that we will see is the lambda expression. Okay, so here basically what we are doing is we're joining a couple of tables, especially the timing table and the time slot table for a given branch, and then we're trying to pull all its available slots. Okay, that is what we are doing. So let's start with the variable. So I'm defining a variable called dining tables, and then how you use your link queue is start with the db context dot the table that you want, and here in our case it's a dining table, and then we are going to apply a filter in the var class where restaurant id restaurant branch id equal to branch id that you pass. Now dot select, this is something called dot select many. So select many will it's another extension method. This will actually flatten the result, okay, to the link between the time slots and the dining table. I will give you how this query works in detail after we finish this in the in the just below the code. You can read about it and you can understand what each line of code is doing. Okay, so let's use the select menu to flatten the result. So I'm going to use the time slots table, but it looks like there was a mistake in the dining table. So basically dining table will have a linkage between the time slots, right? So I'm going to add whatever was missed here. Just don't worry, when you take the code you'll have everything working. So time slot, so the time slots can be used here. Okay, that's why we use the select menu. And then what this function will do is basically it will flatten the result. Okay, so for a given um, dining table there will be multiple time slots, correct? For one table there could be a breakfast, lunch and dinner. Okay, that's why it's called select menu. We are using it now. Inside this we will be able to return an anonymous properties. So this is called anonymous properties. Okay, um, basically we are returning a bunch of property that we eventually use it in the return type. And there is another mistake which I didn't notice. It's a table name. It's no more called seat name. Okay, it doesn't make sense. So that's why I changed it to a table name. All right. Now here what we will do, we will apply another var class where the reservation date, right? The reservation date belongs to time slot ID. We are saying its date should be equal to the date that was passed. Okay, that is what this var class is doing. And after this we will order this by two things. First thing that we will order is it will order by the ID, the time slot ID. Okay, because as and when the entry falls it will be in order. Then you order it by meal type, because breakfast will come first, lunch followed by dinner. Okay, so that's why I mean this is just to show you that you can use different link queue extension method, and that's why I'm just showing all these things. Finally, you wanted to return a list of dining table with slot meal. I mean the model that is in the signature, right? That is what you wanted to return. Okay, now if you look at this, why the select is not coming? Because the previous query, right, it's a task of result. We haven't awaited for the result. See, this is why the async await comes into picture. If you are looking for data, you should definitely need an async await at this point of time. See, this is a perfect example where we were looking for data here. That's why we're putting the async await, and then we are formatting the data the way we want. Now this is called lambda query. Okay, this is called link queue lambda expression. The one that you're going to see now, literally it's the same query. I could have copy pasted and removed the data alone, but I wanted to show you a different query. Now like I said, these are the details of the query that we just wrote. This one will clearly tell you what is this. See, this performs a flattening operation using the select menu method. Okay, you can go through these things. Each one of the classes will be defined here what it is doing, and you should definitely understand this. Okay, now like I said, I can copy paste this and remove the date so that we can complete this line number 93, 94, 95. But I don't want to do that. I really wanted to show you that you can write queries in two different ways. The query that you're seeing on my screen right now is called non-lambda expression. This is also called link query, but this way of writing query looks like similar to the SQL query. Okay, now behind the scene, both the query will generate SQL query. You can see that in the console when you run it. Okay, it's just that a flavor, I would say. Both has its own flavors, plus and minus. This sometimes looks very easy compared to the lambda expression when you have multiple joins. Okay, you really need to know how to work on link queries, but let's keep it simple. This we are doing that we're joining the tables called restaurant table, dining table and time slot table. The three tables we joined, and finally we retrieve the data that we want. Here if they don't pass the date, like I said, the reservation date is always considered as current date and above. So it's going to retrieve those information from the current date. Okay, and so you should know lambda and non-lambda link queue queries. All right, now we are done with the important data layers. We need to have these three methods exposed in the service. Since our service doesn't have much business logic, it's going to be very easy. We will add those methods and we will implement it. Control period will give you um, the option to implement, and this is like literally straightforward. You're going to literally call the repository endpoints, the method names, and you're going to return the result. Okay, as simple as that. All right. Now here comes the final one called the controllers. Here we need to add different endpoints. Because we already saw how this endpoint works, I'm going to quickly copy paste a piece of code which will have three endpoints, and I'll go over each endpoints. Okay, so let's do this. I copy pasted the second endpoint. Okay, the second endpoint is basically you pass the restaurant ID and retrieve all the restaurants, I mean say the branch of those restaurants. Okay, so that's why we put the route as branch name slash, we put a bracket and then put anything that's called the variable. So the restaurant ID here, line number 28, should match with what you have it on 31 in the parameters. If the spelling doesn't match, it won't work, meaning whatever you pass will not come and sit on this parameter. Okay, here we pass this. If you don't get any result, which means there is no data present, so we simply send 404. We don't found, no results found. Okay, and then if it is there, it's going to return a okay result, which is to 200 HTTP status code. Alright, similar to that, two more methods. One is you pass the branch ID, get all the running tables, and then the last one is you pass the branch ID and the date, you get all the running tables. Okay, this will eventually call the service method. Service method will eventually call the data layer, which is the repository, restaurant repository layer, and I think pretty much that's it. We run it, we should be up and running with all the four endpoints. See, it's very easy. We just need to use the appropriate produce response type and all the possible decoration, and you should be good. See, now I'm passing 1. I'm expecting to get 5 results, the 5 branches, and here you go, we got the 5 results. And similarly, if you come and execute the third endpoints, here we are trying to get the running table for a particular branch. For this branch, it's there. But same thing, you pass a branch and a particular date. So in this case, I'm passing 30th July 2023, and there are records, so I'm getting the records. In case I pass something else, there is no slot open for this restaurant on 31st, so I didn't get the data. I hope you enjoyed this video and you know how to build the web API. We just get started, and in the next video we will jump on and use the second Azure service and deploy our app to the Azure web app. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more tech tutorials. And don't forget to hit the bell icon to get notified when we post new videos. If you have any questions or suggestions, leave them in the comments below. Happy coding!